Welcome back to Code Hive, the place where we make it work, make it right, and make it fast. So in today's video, I want to talk about sequences, right? So what are sequences? So a sequence is basically an object that produces a string of distinct numbers. Okay, so basically it's just like auto increment, right? So in Oracle, SQL developer, it's just called a sequence. So it's done differently compared to how we'd normally do our auto increment. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So it has a starting number and an increment of up to 28 digits, right? And like I said before, it is frequently used to generate primary key values in database tables. So how does the syntax look? So the syntax is as follows. So you create, right? So what are you creating? You're creating a sequence, right? So then what are you going to call your sequence? So your sequence name, then start with, which will then be your initial value, then increment by, which will be your increment value, and then you have your minimum value or no minimum value, and then you have maximum value or a no max value, and then you have cycle or no cycle, and cache or no cache. So I will explain all of this in detail right now. Okay, so the first one that we can see is the start with, right? So start with indicates what the sequence starting value is. So if you want your sequence to start at 1, then that's what you're going to substitute there. So you are going to say start with 1. Then that will be your initial value. Okay, and then the increment by, it specifies the value added to the current sequence value to create a new value. So if you start with 1 and then you say increment by 1, then that means the next value will be 2, and so forth, so forth. Okay, and then the next one that we have is the min value and max value. So the min value and max value, it identifies the lowest and maximum number that can be used in a descending and ascending sequence. Okay, so it all makes sense once we get into our Oracle and work on it. Okay, and then the next one that we have is the no minimum value and no maximum value. So this indicates that the sequence is not subject to any minimum or maximum value constraints, right? So what this means is that the sequence can generate values from the initial value without any lower limit, right? Or any upper limit. So without any lower limit in terms of the minimum value and without any upper limit in terms of the maximum value. Okay, so I don't know if that makes sense, but like I said, it will kind of make sense as we start working on it. And then the next one that we have from our syntax is cycle or no cycle. So the sequence restarts when it reaches the maximum or minimum value if cycle is specified. So if you chose cycle, then the sequence will restart once it reaches the maximum value. So let's say you start with the number 1, right? And then the maximum value is 5, right? So once it reaches 5 and you've indicated cycle, then it will go back and start again from 1 until like that. But if you say no cycle, then an error is raised when the sequence reaches its maximum or minimum value. Okay, so again, if you said start with 1 and then it reaches the maximum, which is 5. If you said no cycle, then once it reaches to 5, then it will raise an error to say, hey, listen, you've reached your maximum value. Okay, so it's best to actually always choose cycle, because it just eliminates so many problems, right? So that way Oracle will know, like, okay, listen, I've reached the maximum value, so let me just start again, right? So it's kind of better, but I know people have different preferences, but personally for me, I feel like it's better to indicate cycle instead of no cycle. Okay, and then the next one that we have is cache or no cache. Okay, so for cache, right, if you specified cache, then the number of values from the sequence that should be cached in memory for a quicker access is specified. So for this, the minimum value is 2, right? Then the maximum value of the sequence for no cycle is the same as the maximum value of the cache clause. So what this means is that if you indicated no cycle, right? So if you were on this part over here and you indicated no cycle, right? Then when you reach to cache or no cache and you say cache, then the cache should be equal to the maximum value that you've indicated. That's if you indicated no cycle. Okay. But if you've indicated cycle, then the number of values from the sequence that should be cached in memory for a quicker access is specified. Okay, so now the minimum value will then be 2. Okay, so I don't know if it makes sense or not, really. So also, you can have, what is that? Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, so for the no cache, right, it indicates that there isn't a value from the sequence stored in memory. A sequence default setting is cache with a value of 20. Okay, so again, for me personally, I just always keep it at cache and I just say 20 because that's just the default setting. Okay, so that's just how I do it. Yeah, so that's basically the cache and no cache, and that's all for the syntax in terms of the sequence. So now what I want us to look at is actually how to create a sequence and how to actually use it, because it's very different from creating your normal table and just saying primary key or auto increment, start at 100, increment by 1. It's very different. Okay, so I want us to actually look at that right now. Okay, so now that we have looked at the syntax on how to create a sequence and what a sequence is, I want us to actually create one and actually use it. So what I did is I created a simple table with 2 columns. So it's student ID, which is int, which is not now primary key, and the student name, which is a varchar2 data type. So again, if you still haven't watched my video where I talk about data types, then please do that. Okay, so this is just a simple table, really. I just want to show you guys how to use the sequence. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create our sequence. Okay, so the first thing that you do is create, right? So what are you creating? You're creating a sequence. Okay, and what is the sequence name? So I want to call it student sequence. Okay, so now the next thing that we have is start with, right? So start with, so I wanted to start with 100, okay? And I wanted to increment by 1, okay? And I don't want to have a minimum value, so I'm just going to say no min value. And the max value that I want is let's say 1,000. 1,000. Okay. And then actually let me say 10,000. Okay. And then now what we have is the cycle and the cache. Okay. So like I told you guys, I always keep it as cycle. That way it really eliminates so much work, because now you have to constantly check if, okay, has it reached the maximum value, so just to make life easier, I just prefer using cycle. And then I also prefer using cache. So again, cache default is 20, so you could also use 10 depending on your maximum value. So I just always keep it as 20. Okay, so let us run this quickly. Okay, so our sequence has been created. Okay, cool. So now the question now is, okay, I have a sequence, but now how do I use it in terms of my table? Okay, so now when you're doing your insert, right? So now we're going to look at using sequence in your table. Okay, so basically, okay, so we want to insert values into the students table. Okay, so we're going to say insert into students. Okay, and then we're going to say values. Okay, so now, so we can see that, okay, the first one, right, is the student ID, which will be the primary key. So we have looked earlier on that the sequence is used for the primary key most of the times. So how do you work that out? Okay, so the first thing that you want to insert, right, is the student ID. But I want the student ID to come from the sequence, okay? So what do? So you first going to call your sequence name. So because my sequence is student sequence, I'm going to call it. And then the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to say dot next val. So dot next val. So if you are familiar with Java, C#, or any of those, you will know that when you use the dot, right? So when you say something dot something, then you're calling a method, right? So by saying dot next val, it will automatically get the next value in the sequence. Okay, so that's for the first one. That's for the student ID. Then the second thing that we have is our student name. So let's say Bob. Okay, cool. So now let's have at least 3. Okay, so from Bob, I'm going to say Sam, and I'm going to say Mpo. Okay, so everything else stays the same. Because this is calling from the sequence, then it remains like that. Okay, so now if we execute those 3 statements, it will say inserted, inserted, inserted. Okay, so now how do you check? Okay, so let's select all from our table. So from our students table. Okay, so if we execute that part, then we should see what we have over there. So we have the student ID column, right, which is the primary key column. So we can see that, okay, it called the sequence, right? So we said that the start value should be 100. Okay, then we said increment by 1 each time. So you can see that it went from 100, then it went to 101, then it went to 102. Okay, so that's how you call your sequence. Okay, so one thing that I want you guys to remember or to know is the fact that let's say we have this. Okay, so let's say, let me just quickly show you guys. So let me just say student sequence 2. Okay, oops. Okay, so what I want to show you guys is if you said start with 100, or let's say if we said start with 1, increment by 1, and then we say the maximum value is 5, right? And we execute that sequence, then it will give us an error. Okay, so what the error is saying is that the number to cache must be less than 1 cycle. So now the cache default is 20, right? But then if you can see our maximum value is 5, that's too low, right? That is really too low. So that's why they're saying that, okay, enlarge the cycle or cache fewer values. Okay, so if now we change the maximum value to that, okay, and then we execute it again now, then it should say that it has been created, right? Because now the space and the maximum value, they correspond. Okay, so just be careful of that, right? Really just be careful of that. But anyway, so that's how you use the sequence. So we indicated a start value, we indicated increment by, we said no minimum value, we said maximum value, and then we said cycle, and we said cache. Okay, so the next thing that I just want to indicate to you guys is that, so the no min value. So what happens if you had said that you want a minimum value of something, right? So instead of saying no min value, you say minimum value, maybe let's say 20. So what happens is that the no minimum value indicates that you cannot have a value that is less than that number. So if you said minimum value of 2 and you say start with 2, then that means that you cannot have a number that is less than 2. Okay, so that's just really what the no min value does. So again, if you say no min value of 30, if you say minimum value of 30, but then you say start with 1, let's say, let me just try that so I can show you guys what happens. It will give you an error because okay, let me try this. Oops. Okay, cool. So now what it says now is that, okay, the start with cannot be less than the minimum value. So basically, yeah, when you use the start with and the minimum value together, you need to just make sure that the start with and the minimum value is the same. Because you can't say, okay, start with 1, but then the minimum value is 30. So now how is that going to work? So if you had changed that to 30, okay, and then you say minimum value of 30, then only will it run. Okay, so now it has been created. So really, for me personally, I just feel like it's really pointless to indicate the minimum value, because for me, basically, the minimum value is just the same as the start with. Okay, so that's it for this video, guys. I hope this video was very helpful. Please let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell for more videos like this, and don't forget to hit the like button if you liked this video. Thank you guys so much for watching.